Okay, let's do this thing. Whenever
this
you're
is
ready.
Hillary. Oh,
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm ready.
You're ready.
Okay. This is Hillary DeCesar from the Relaunch Co. And you are listening to Vroom, Vroom, Veer with Jeff Smith, reminding you to relaunch now using the Tune In Power Tool.
Tune In Power Tool. Wow. Yeah. Sweet.
Now
okay.
I know. Now I know we'll talk about it.
Yeah, there you go.
I gotcha. I got you locked and loaded on the Tune In Power Tool.
I love it.
And by the way, you're going to love it.
I can't wait to talk about it. Let me hit stop. I'll be right back.
Are you ready to thoughtfully steer away from your revved up, frenzied, and far too often scripted life? Then welcome to Vroom Vroom Veer with Jeff Smith, where he guides you down the road differently traveled by sharing unique experiences with guests who have managed to shift away from a life stuck on cruise control and veered their way into a more authentic and fulfilling one in all sorts of interesting and kind of remarkable ways. Get ready to Vroom Vroom Veer with your differently traveled road chauffeur, Jeff Smith.
Chris Marshall, thank you so much for being on Vroom Vroom Veer and welcome to the show. How's it going?
Very good, and thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
And you are in the UK and I'm in Vegas, so you've got a gym appointment.
Yeah,
you need
we're
to
at
get
opposite
to.
ends of the day.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just out of bed, still working off my coffee and donut high. I'm still a little buzzed. In a fun way. Let's see what kind of show we make. Okay.
Amazing.
So you are at chrismarshall.uk. So talk a little bit about what's going on in your life, professionally, personally, everything else that you want to share.
Yeah, so I guess it's the hardest question for me is kind of like, what do you do? Because
right.
I'm the kind of the typical multi-passioned person. I've done a lot of things. I will always do a lot of things.
Right.
So I'm just going to reel them off, and when you can dig into wherever you want to go with it.
Sure.
So my career as such is as a behavioural scientist and professional futurist.
Oh wow. Okay.
So I really kind of dig into how the world's changing and how that change affects our thinking and affects us and our decision making.
Sure. A lot, I would think.
Yeah,
quite a bit.
Yeah, just underline that. Yeah, there we go. You've got it nailed. Other things. I'm a trainee psychotherapist. I'm an executive coach. I am also head of investment strategy for a boutique fund manager.
Wow.
I've had a distillery. I've been a youth athlete. Yeah, I just think I just collect things to learn about. So yeah.
Well, now you got to get a podcast and a blog and a YouTube channel, right? Add all those. Just keep piling on, Chris. It's fun.
Absolutely.
You just need more things to do. That's
yeah. This is it. I'm just clearly just bored.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
So okay. So this is Vroom Vroom Veer. That means we need to go back in the past and talk about where you grew up and what you were like when you were a kid. So where did you grow up? What were you like when you were a kid?
So I grew up in North Wales. So kind of the on the beautiful part of the British Isles, and just like gorgeous. Kind of my back garden was Snowdonia. And if you don't know it, then it's kind of this. We call them mountains. to most of the rest of the world, they're hills.
Okay.
We would get very precious if you called them hills.
Okay.
we think they're big, but they're about 3,000 feet. That's the highest.
Right. Okay.
But as a kid, I kind of had that as a back garden. And I was extraordinarily lucky just to have that freedom of living in this area and kind of growing up around that. So I think that kind of influenced a lot of my thinking. Always had a big connection to what's going on around us, to nature, to how things kind of change over very long time scales. And then kind of the next kind of part of my life, if we're going to section it up and dissect it, is I got into skiing.
Oh, wow.
And it was a local artificial slope because our hills aren't big enough for snow.
Can't be racing down those bunny hills, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, Snowdonia.
Mountains.
Mountains. That's what I meant.
And I just took to it. And that was kind of my introduction. I think I was about 7 years old, 7, 8 years old.
Wow. So this is the
really,
youth athlete part. You were skiing competitively?
Absolutely.
My goodness.
Well, not at 7 or 8. So that was my first introduction. And I was just lucky enough that the local ski club had an incredible range of coaches. Like they'd all been, well, 2 or 3 of them have been ex-British team. And it was just this environment of I took to it and they could progress me. And then quite quickly, I raced up until about 16, 17 years old. But got to see the world. I came into contact with a sports psychologist called Dr. Jim Taylor, an American guy out in Vermont.
Wow.
And that was really the start of my love for psychology, because it was the first moment where I understood that if you want to be the best athlete you can be, it's not just about showing up and the physicality, it's about showing up and the mentality.
Yeah.
And as a kid, that was like mind blowing, because you're like, I've spent all the time on this dry ski slope. I've spent time in the gym, and I've never really thought about my mind or kind of the psychology behind it. So that was kind of a real pivotal moment. And I think that's probably the bit that's carried through into my adult life. Hence why I'm a behavioural scientist, because how we approach change and how we approach life and how we make decisions in businesses and everything else, it matters so much, but we pay little attention to it. That's kind of the weirdness of it. We believe as long as we show up, everything else will be fine, and we can just kind of like rely on our training and knowledge base and everything else. But actually, how you show up is so
huge. You said, because I think one of the lessons I learned in my, especially like towards the end of my Air Force career, I started getting into like spiritual stuff and reading just a lot of personal development, self-development stuff, right? And then this whole like, oh, what is that guy doing? He's just showing up, right? And that was sort of like, you say it like a way of like saying, well, he's not ready, right? He's here, but he's, barely here, right? Right. And then, when you get into this personal development world, when people say, how is this guy showing up? It takes on a completely different meaning, I remember like one of my massage school instructors talking about the Dalai Lama's Chinese medicine doctor, right? Okay. And he would, before he saw patients, he would meditate 3 hours. Wow. And then he could diagnose you by like holding his hand on your wrist. And like they have this awesome method of doing like diagnostic with pulse on like different levels, right? Like, yeah. Have you ever heard of this? And so
I've never heard of this. Yeah. All I'm thinking at the moment is I want that work schedule.
Yeah. Meditate 3 hours before you see any patients. But I think so. Talk about showing up though, right? And I don't think he's napping, that everybody thinks in the US, like meditation, it's kind of like taking a nap. It's no big deal if you fall asleep. This guy's not falling asleep. And by the way, he correctly diagnosed like almost everything that this patient had, like in 5 minutes,
Amazing.
Exactly. And all he did was, do pulse, right? I was like, wow. Okay. So anyway, there we go. There's our first tangent. Thank you. And I was going to also say, I think I visited Wales and only one time, because I lived in the UK like 3 years. Okay. And I want to say there's a big castle that everybody knows about, and I'm blanking on it. What's the big famous castle?
So in Wales, we're kind of famous for castles.
Okay.
I'm going to make
there's lots of castles.
I'm going to make up the number, but I'm just going to say there's about 150 still standing.
Wow. Okay. Let me see.
I could take a stab in the dark, but
what's the big city again? Help me out.
So Cardiff is the capital of Wales,
right? Okay. Is that
Cardiff
touristy?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. And then back up in North Wales, where I am, there's Carnarvon Castle, which is probably one of the biggest. Conway Castle.
Okay.
Conway Castle Conway was voted by National Geographic, or maybe it was Lonely Planet, one of those two, as the most kind of photogenic.
There you go.
Which it is. I mean, actually, it's one of my running routes. I mean, that's kind of where I live. I mean, it's stunning.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of castles.
Right. So now I'll have to go and ask my wife where we went in Wales. It wasn't like, it was like we were in Suffolk.
Okay.
So it wasn't a horribly long drive, as I remember, getting to Wales. So it might have been South Wales, but I don't know. See, I'm just telling you, like, I know we went. What I remember is looking at the Welsh language going, I don't even know how to attempt to say those words.
I can do a few, but it's about a handful. So,
but
this won't become a Welsh lesson. I'm not that skilled.
Right. So the memory that I have is driving by the castle off the motorway, and then where we stayed seemed like this idyllic sort of like country villa kind of thing. It was in the woods, and there was this walk bridge. And I just felt like I was in a movie. So I know what you mean. I know what you're talking about. It's just gorgeous countryside. It's like, I never want to live. Yeah. So those are the impressions of my very bad memory of Wales.
Amazing. Well, wherever it was, I'm glad it was a good lasting memory.
There you go. So, okay. So this is fun because you actually go through this whole like, sports professional as a kid.
Yeah.
And that's your intro to psychology, which is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it was, I mean, it was, you look back on life and you see these pivotal moments, don't you?
Huge. Yeah.
These kind of the moments which change you and were fundamental. And that was definitely one of them. Actually, what was nice was Dr. Jim Taylor. I hadn't spoke to him in 25 years. And I recently got him on my podcast as a guest.
Oh, wow.
And so we reconnected, and we're currently just hashing out whether we can do something collaboratively.
Yeah, that's fun.
Which is amazing. Which would be amazing to do.
That would be awesome. Right. So is he still in the business? He's still
he's still
coaching?
A performance psychologist.
Wow.
I mean, his career, he coaches entrepreneurs, business leaders, Olympic athletes.
I was going to say Olympic athletes would be like the money.
Absolutely amazing.
So give us a sample of like what was a kind of thing that you learned to do as far as like psychological preparation for sports? Is it like visualization or?
Yeah. So a lot of visualization,
Gotcha.
Because I mean, obviously your body doesn't know, or your mind doesn't know what's just being kind of cooked up in your own head and what it's experiencing. I mean, let's take this back a step.
Yeah, please.
Your brain is actually, it's in a black box with no windows.
Right.
It doesn't have a clue what's going on out there. It relies completely on those senses.
Right.
And so what you find within sports psychology and lots of other psychology as well, is that when you do kind of imagery work, guided imagery, meditation, whatever it might be, is you're actually preparing and firing up certain pathways that you'll be using when you actually physically go do something. And there's some incredible stories about this, kind of athletes who've been injured and they've spent the whole season just mentally rehearsing what they do, and they can get back on whether it's a tennis court or an ice hockey kind of arena or whatever sport.
Right.
And they haven't lost anything.
Wow. That's incredible.
It's so powerful. And so that was a lot of the stuff that I did with Jim in those days. I literally bumped into him for like 2-3 days, and he was running a program. And I mean, what else kind of was going on? I was a fairly anxious athlete. I think this probably came into being neurodiverse.
Right. Okay.
And so for me, my interesting challenge was actually in training. I could train extremely well. I actually knew I could nearly beat anybody in training.
Okay.
When it came to race day, there was a completely different story. I just kind of, I wouldn't necessarily freak out, but I just couldn't perform at the same level.
Okay.
And it was pressure. It was anxiety.
Yeah.
And in fact, so in ski racing, I don't know how much you know about it, but it's normally 2 runs added together. Certainly when we're talking about slalom and giant slalom.
Okay.
And so you do a first run, they change the course, you do a second run, and then they add those 2 times together, and whoever's got the fastest overall time is the winner.
Okay.
And so for me, what bizarre would happen is in the first run, I wouldn't place anywhere. And then I'd have nothing to lose in the second run and catch up. I mean, it was like the most inefficient strategy going.
Right.
Or worse, if I did well in the first run, I'd have so much anxious pressure on me in the second that I'd either like blow out the course or I just wouldn't complete it. So there was there's a lot of work we did with that, not necessarily with Jim this time, but with other performance psychologists. And so that kind of, I'm going to come all the way forward now into my modern work. So in the thing that you got me to read just before we started, I said the phrase pause, play, move, which is a framework which I developed for making great decisions in what I'm going to call disruptive or chaotic environments, which we're all now being exposed to.
We live there. Yes, we live
there. Absolutely. And actually kind of putting my futurist hat on for a second, when we look out to over the next 20, 30 years, the level of disruption is only likely to get far more than less.
It's going to get crazy. Yes.
It's going to, absolutely. And we're
like
not
exponential crazy. I concur.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Because when disruption happens, when innovation occurs, what's actually happening is, of course, not only the status quo, the normal way of you living life, the normal way that you do something or make something or communicate with people, not only does that get completely obliterated potentially, but also it starts exposing your beliefs and your identity, because your beliefs and identity are tied to what you do and how you do it.
Yeah.
And so this is why I believe that one of the reasons anyway, why we've got massive rising anxiety in society, why we've got rising stress levels, why we've got burnout in workplaces. So I developed a framework. So a lot of my research as a behavioral scientist was looking at resiliency, mental toughness. Which obviously is normally rooted in the sporting arena, but there's no surprise why I was fascinated with that.
Right.
And then I was looking at within investors, how, if somebody has resiliency or mental toughness, how do they actually make decisions about investment losses and gains? Do they process those differently to somebody who isn't? You'd expect the answer to be that they would. And the irony of this story, I'm not going to dig into research, but the irony of this story is while I was researching resiliency, I personally burnt out.
Of course you did.
I didn't find it very funny at the time.
Right. Of course not.
But afterwards, there is this great irony that, kind of here I am researching a personality type or an attitude which is meant to protect you from burnout. And I fall straight into it.
Yes. Yeah.
And it was at that point I kind of realized, okay, well, within the workplace, if you're doing knowledge work, if you're trying to make continually good decisions as a CEO or an entrepreneur or an investment manager or any of these industries where it's constant bombardment of change and making the next best decision, then I don't believe the way we put across resiliency and mental toughness works.
Okay.
Or it's not complete. That's the way I'm going to put it. I'm not going to say it's wrong. It's just as society, we've overlooked two major things, which is where most of my work now focuses, which is society tells you, and actually you alluded to this in that story of meditation, society tells us that if we pause, we're lazy.
Right.
Because we're not pushing forward. We could go faster. We could do more.
You're wasting time. Right.
If you've got time to pause, well, that just means you haven't got much motivation.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It's like taking these really old stories and applying them to now. Right.
Yeah.
It's weird because like we've got ancient stories that tell us this thing. Like, have you ever heard that story about how Abraham Lincoln won a tree cutting down contest by sharpening his saw? Yeah, so his competition just went crazy with the saw, right? And just kept going. And every once in a while, Abe Lincoln would stop, pause, and got a file and he'd sharpen the saw and then go back to it and just slow, steady. It's kind of like the slow, steady kind of idea and sharpen the saw, right? And he wins, it's like, it's the same idea,
Oh, I love that. I love that story.
It's so simple, Yeah.
And that completely depicts exactly so within this pause, play, move framework,
right?
And it's really simple. is the pause is about reconnecting with ourselves. So it's not being a lazy. It's not just going, oh my word, I'm going to put my feet up for 5 minutes because I feel like I deserve it. Or some guy called Chris Marshall living in Wales tells me that that's going to do magic for things.
Right.
The pause is all about Abraham Lincoln sharpening his sword. And it's about us actually just kind of tuning in and going, where am I right now? Because what's amazing, what the research is showing us is when we're stressed, we not only process data differently, we take in completely different information from the world. So you'll know this from your own life. If you're stressed and you come home to your partner or significant other or pet or whoever, then when you come in and you're stressed, you can't connect because you're solely in your world.
Right.
If you're stressed out, you can't even be social. They ask you how your day is, and you just bite the head off. Mild stress, you can still be social, but you can't be intimate. Intimacy actually only can happen when you're calm.
Right.
So often when I'm speaking to audiences, so if I'm just kind of doing a keynote or something, I stand up in front of the audience, and my first question is quite often, put your hand up when I say the place you have your best thinking. And I start off just because it's quite funny for me, actually. I'm going to make out that I'm really quite a horrible person now.
Sure.
But I find it quite funny. If I start off by going the office, then nobody puts their hand up.
Right.
You look around the audience and you can spot the one person sat next to their boss who feels obliged to go, yes.
Right.
Yeah. But everyone else is silent. And then it's when you start going, the shower, everybody just goes, yes, or the beach, or yoga, or gardening.
Right. Taking a walk.
And the point I'm trying to make to everybody is it's got absolutely nothing to do with the location or the activity. It's got everything to do with the internal state.
Right.
And when we actually can master that stress response, that emotion,
right,
when we can pause, the pause is the starting point, because that's about awareness. And when we can master that, we can bring ourselves down, we can down-regulate. And what's amazing is those breakthrough moments, those aha moments, those kind of like, oh my word, I don't know where I got that thought from. You can get more of them. All you have to do is get yourself into this calm, joyous state rather than be energized and hyped up.
Right.
And I mean, it takes time. I've just explained it as if anyone can do it within 5 seconds.
Like a calm button.
Yeah. Oh, if we could have a calm button, absolutely. So I now teach decision makers and entrepreneurs how to do that.
Right. You're like a breathwork coach now, right? I saw that on the resume.
That was one of the things. Yeah. So kind of, I personally love breathwork.
Sure.
I've used it a lot. That was actually one of the techniques going all the way back to being a ski racer. Actually, breathwork was one of the things for me that helps me reset. Okay, so deep breaths actually directly stimulate our vagus nerve and help us calm.
Yeah, huge amount of science on the breath. That's mostly, automatic, right?
Yeah.
But you can also take conscious control, and the conscious control has a biofeedback loop. Yeah, you know all these things. I'm not saying anything that you don't know, but it's huge. Have you ever like smoked a lot of weed?
Do you know what? No, I haven't.
Okay. So, all right. So that's okay. It's all right. But one of the things you do when you do like weed, and this is more like back in the day when it wasn't like new weed, not so much. You don't really need to do a whole lot of breathing. But way back in the day, like when I was a teenager, so this is like early 80s, when you did your weed hit, right? So you take the pipe and you hold your breath and you don't let it out, right? Because weed was weak back then, right? And you held it in your lungs, right? And later on, when I started like doing breath work, right? Now take the weed out of it, right?
Okay.
I was doing breath work for massage school and meditation classes and everything else. And I get done with some of these sessions. I'm like, I feel like I'm high.
Yeah. Because that's you're biohacking your body.
Exactly.
Yeah. what you're showing yourself is you don't need the external.
You
to
don't
feel
actually
that
need that weed necessarily. Right.
Yeah. And that's I think you've made a really good point here. That's what our society is kind of predicated itself on for decades, is if I want to feel this way, something outside of me must change.
Right.
And
yes.
I'm not saying that any of these things I'm doing, I discovered. I certainly, I really, really didn't.
No.
That they're embedded in ancient culture.
They are.
It's all that has happened, and I'm going to throw the Industrial Revolution completely under the bus here.
That's true.
All that happened is like kind of 240 years ago when we invented this thing called the steam engine, and we got hyper obsessed with efficiency and output.
Right.
And
yeah.
And shortly after that, KPIs and goals and everything other that management people love to speak about.
Yeah.
They just kind of forgot about the input. That everything was about output. And so, you actually saw subtle changes in society, which when you actually think about them, they weren't so subtle. Things like when we went to a factory-based production system, we think about that changing the way we produce things, and it's right. But we forget how it mechanized our thinking.
Right.
So obviously what happened is, I don't know, say you were a hat maker in 1750. I would pay you for the finished garment. And if you were really good at making hats, you'd command a premium price for it.
Right.
When we get to the factory model, you're now being paid by the hour. That's very different. You're not being paid for the finished product. You're just being paid to, I don't know, whatever you did. Put some more wool on a loom or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah,
you're a cog in a machine.
Pull a lever.
Right.
And this is where you start to get into that. We started treating humans as just a labor input.
Right.
So human resources, we've now shifted back, thankfully, to human capital. We understand that humans bring far more than just some biomass.
That's right.
But that was the basics.
If we could just get a machine to do this, it would be so much cheaper, right?
Yeah.
Was the attitude forever, right? Yes.
Yeah. And that kind of filtered through into our thinking. And we believe we were too clever. And a lot of these things like breathing, really?
Right.
Kind of, I've got a clock and I can measure, like in you're on about breathing.
Right.
And we just overlooked all these things. Pausing, as I said, kind of is not only dismissed by society, but actually ridiculed. That's classed as laziness.
Exactly.
And we haven't even got to phase 2 of the PPM framework, which is playfulness.
Right.
Oh my word, if you want to be successful, then we kind of run with this model of success means seriousness and stressed.
Right.
That's
right. Crazy.
The opposite of play. But actually, when you look at it, playfulness, let's just talk about that for a second. We're having a lot of fun here. And that's what playfulness as an adult is. It's actually taking yourself less seriously, not taking a task less seriously.
Exactly.
It's not about mucking around, or it's not about being irreverent, or it's not about not giving a damn about how something happens.
Right.
But playfulness, when we actually start digging into that as a mindset, not only is it energizing, you can't be playful and be like, oh, I don't care.
Right. You can't be Marvin, the depressed robot when you're having a good time.
So first of all, it's about energy. Okay. So playfulness is about energy. Pausing, let's rewind a second. Pausing gives you those breakthrough thoughts. Pausing allows you to reset. Pausing allows you to connect with others. Pausing allows you to step back from the chaos or the intensity of an emotion. Playfulness, we can only be play when we feel safe. That's the kind of the premise.
The psychological safety.
Yeah. We can't be playful if we feel threatened. That's our biology. Hence why in the PPM method, we pause first and we bring down a stress state, because then we realize that feeling of safety is internal, not external. Then we can move to playfulness, because now we feel safe inside. We're calm, we're intimate, we're joyous, we're all these different things. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So playfulness is then about experimentation. It's about collaboration. It's about cooperativeness with others.
Yeah.
It's about just failure. When management loves to talk about failure, and failure is, doesn't exist, or it's just one step closer to success. All of those things are right. but it requires a certain mindset to believe that phrase. If you're stressed out and somebody goes, "Oh, failure is just a temporary setback," there's some pretty stern words that you reply to because you're like, "I don't want to hear it."
Right.
If you're in a playful state, you go, "Oh yeah." In fact, you don't even need somebody to tell you because you're like,
you're going to catch it yourself. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to try it this way.
Yeah.
And as a kid, that's exactly how they play. You know, often games, you don't win at them as a kid.
Yeah. You're making them up.
Out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, I don't know, you're playing like tag or TIG wherever you are in the world.
Right.
We seem to exchange those two. But you always get caught in the end. You know, I don't believe there's been a kid that's still out there 40 years on.
Right. Never been tagged. Right.
Hasn't been found.
Oh my goodness. So he's playing hide and seek and he's still hiding. Oh no. So you're demonstrating to yourself as a kid that playfulness isn't actually about necessarily winning all the time. It's just about finding an angle, finding a perspective, and going with it. And then if that doesn't work next time, you try somewhere else. Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. I have a good story that has that from the military, my military days.
Okay.
Like, do you know anything about, well, I'll try to make this really short. So I was in charge of a lot of things, right? Like a whole, like about 200 user network.
Okay.
On a classified network. But one of the things that was sort of like this thing that I never thought about, it just always worked, right? Was the voicemail server. So this is like early aughts, okay? So the voicemail server was it was like two computers and a monitor, right? One was Windows and one was Linux, right? And it was kind of like fire and forget, you know?
Okay.
As long as it's on and doing its thing, you don't really need to do anything to it, right?
Okay.
And then suddenly it stopped working. But my current boss, right, was like, well, he didn't use voicemail. And he worked for the colonel, and he had a secretary and an executive officer and a captain, right? So the bosses that I was directly working for couldn't give two shits that nobody else could get voicemail, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, bad on them, right? So I had zero pressure. I walked in and I'm like, what kind of pressure are you under to fix this voicemail thing, right? And he's like, none. And I'm like, okay, cool. So I had to work out paperwork and pay this big bill, right? And the company, after we paid them, sent us a brand new server, 2 servers, right? They said, it's broke, we'll just replace it. But your maintenance bill has lapsed. And I'm like, maintenance bill? I didn't even know we were paying for this, right? That's how things work in the military. So I find out, I pay the bill, they ship out new servers, right? And again, no pressure, but they show up and I'm like, I called the company. I was like, are you going to come out and install them for us? And they're like, no, not until we actually get the check. But, you know, feel free, you know, go ahead, knock yourself out. It's not hard, right? And I'm like, oh, okay. So I'm thinking I'm going to go down there and just plug it in and turn it on and then wait for somebody from the company to make it work. That's my plan and goal, right?
Okay.
Take the hardware, swap it out, turn it on, and then leave.
Look for the green light.
And look for the green light and leave, right?
Yeah.
So when I do all of that, right? Super simple, easy. I brought a troopy with me and we had a good time. We're literally playing, laughing, like no expectation, no pressure, just having a good time, right? We swap out the hardware, we turn it on. And as I'm doing all this stuff, I find this DVD and it's a backup. And I'm like, oh my goodness. Really? Right? So I flip everything on and this little DOS prompt comes up on the Linux box. It says, ready for restore backup. And I went, wow. So I find the DVD, I look through and dig through some drawers and I find the restore process. Super simple. It's like 3 commands, you know, restore. And then it's back up. All before lunch. Like magic. Anyway, I just thought that because I was like relaxed and under zero pressure. Exactly. Right.
Yeah, you can start finding solutions.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. I actually had zero expectation. Right. I wasn't planning to make it work. It was just too easy. So I did.
Yeah. And there's a great example, you know, so you weren't taking, you know, you weren't being like, oh, I don't care if I break this. You know,
no.
It was just, oh, I've been given the freedom to just have a go because the company's gone, it's super easy, give it a go.
Right.
And so you've just demonstrated there that what you didn't do was kind of like you weren't anxious.
Right.
And when we're anxious, you weren't in like this rigid thinking style. And what happens is, so, I mean, let's take this to like real basics of biology.
Okay. Yeah.
When we feel anxious, we're basically saying we feel threatened somehow. And it could be anything. It could be, I haven't got the skills for this, or I've just gone through my social media and my life sucks compared to them. Or whatever.
My boss is going to kill me if I don't fix this by tomorrow.
Yeah. He's just emailed me about a meeting and that's got to be bad. He's going to fire me or whatever.
Right.
When we're doing that, I mean, essentially it's a throwback to like hundreds of thousands of years ago where our biology was created, or where our neuro system was created. And it's all about detection of threats. So back then, it was all about if you detect a threat, normally it was life-threatening and you wanted to get the heck out.
Yes.
Because it was normally a lion
right.
or a tribesman from the other village who was running at you with a club. And so what we start doing is we stop all this executive function in our brain, or we start limiting it. So right at the front of our brain, we have the prefrontal cortex.
Right.
That's our executive thinking function that gives us breakthrough kind of thoughts. And as we get stressed, chemicals start to flood the brain. Cortisol floods the brain. It's an energy hormone, if you like, which allows you to run really fast.
Right.
And it shuts down things like digestion, and it shuts down you being curious, because when a lion is facing you, the last thing you want to do is go, oh, I wonder where it's come from. Or like, I wonder like what it's thinking.
Yeah. If you did, you wouldn't be around anymore. Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so actually when you go up the stress scale, and this is one of the important things I teach people, is that stress is not on or off. We often talk about it like it is. It's either, no, I'm okay, or I'm stressed. And if you start thinking about it in a scale, so 1 being calm, joyous, happy, content, whatever word you want to ascribe to that. At the other end of 5 is stressed out. You are freaking out. I mean, you are literally just like out of your mind.
Right. Screaming, running, people, fighting.
Yeah. Yeah. Most people live their lives at 2 or 3.
Right.
Certainly in the day. Right. Most people do it at night because they're once you get used to a state, you actually like being there.
Okay.
Your body changes so that you update, because it goes, oh, Jeff spends all his time at 3. I can get him there pretty quick, but wouldn't it be more efficient if I rewired him so he just stays at 3 all his life?
Oh, right.
And so this is where we start loving things like endless box sets, because they stimulate us. They're a form of kind of arousal. And actually people start disliking time without distractions. I mean, there are some incredible studies on this where they've put people in a room with no distractions. I mean, we're talking like for only 15 minutes.
Sure.
And one of the options they gave this research group was they were able to administer themselves an electric shock.
Oh,
so
geez.
just think about this. I mean, we're not talking massive, but
right. Just a tickle.
Just think about this. You've been told, okay, sit in this room with no entertainment. There's just a white room. There's no furniture. There's just a chair.
They'd probably take your phone.
Yeah, absolutely. There's nothing to kind of concentrate on.
Right.
Do you just sit there for the length of the experiment and then kind of get up and walk out when the researcher comes back in? Or do you want to get out your head so much that you're prepared to administer electric shock? And it was something daft, like 50%.
Wow.
Decided, just because they didn't want to be with themselves.
Something to do. I've never done that.
Anything. Yeah. Yeah. And so what we're talking about here is back to your story with the servers.
Yeah.
Was you were able, there wasn't that pressure. and you were able to find solutions because you were calm. You were in that state where you could have breakthrough thinking. You could see things from different perspectives, and you could approach stuff without going, oh my word, they've told me this is super hard and X, Y, Z, and I'm going to lose my job by plugging this in, or, none of those things are going through your head because you've basically been told it's cool. Just give it a go.
Yeah, it's a good.
And I find this, I find this fascinating. Just that's all we're talking about is a shift of state, and the outcome is so different. And this is something we don't pay enough attention to in workplaces.
Right.
And I think it's one of the reasons
outcome based too, right?
Yeah. I think it's one of the reasons why we have so much kind of toxic workplaces these days is because everybody's just stressed. It's not that bosses set out to, I don't know. I don't think they do. There's probably a few out there that wake up in the morning and go, how can I make my employees' lives miserable? but most of them don't.
Not really. No.
No. They just
it's just we're swimming in the soup of a bad culture. Right.
They're stressed, so that means that, that people below them can't approach them with things because there's no way you go to a stressed person and say, I feel a bit uneasy about doing this. I'm not sure about my abilities here, because the response.
Yeah.
I've got too much on my plate. You're just going to have to get on with it.
That's right. I don't have time for your problems. Leave me alone, please.
And so, as the world becomes more disruptive and more chaotic, for me, this is where my passion lies, is if I can help people just do that. And that's why I target the decision makers, is because they are the ones that have the influence on everybody else below.
So you've got pause, you've got play. What was the F?
So the last letter is move.
Oh, move. Okay, not F.
So it's that. It's PPM method. Pause, play, move.
Gotcha.
The move, ironically, because everybody kind of gets to the move and goes, oh, so what happens here? and what I like about this is if you've got the pause right and the play right, the move takes care of itself.
Okay, gotcha.
And that's all there is to it, And this is the irony of everything we've just talked about. Is we focus so much over the last few hundred years on just that move.
Right.
How can we be more efficient, more productive? And you're like, if you get the pause and the play right, you almost don't even have to think about the move. Now, you can add in any management techniques you want into the move. I'm not actually saying we don't care about the move.
Right.
I'm just saying that actually the irony is that you want to do something anyway. If you've found a breakthrough but from pausing, and then you're playful and want to experiment,
the
likelihood is you
moving.
do something.
Yes, exactly. You sort of
rather
move
than go
as a result of the first two. Right.
Yeah. And unlike kind of, I don't know, I find a breakthrough, I get really excited and want to experiment, and then I go, oh, well, I'll do that tomorrow. It just doesn't happen.
No, it doesn't happen. So let's talk a little bit about some of your vroom vroom stories. You've already mentioned that you were burnt out. So how did you get there? And I know you kind of talked about that already, but just give us a little brief intro, how you got into burnout and then how you got out of burnout. I think I already know the answers. That's okay. Let's go through them anyway.
So how I got in is very simple. Right. I had a candle and I burnt it at both ends.
Yeah. Right.
But no, in all seriousness, I think I am somebody that has a lot of different passions and interests.
Right.
That's really what I've built my life on, is bringing together different areas of research and different areas of theory.
Right.
And by that nature, you're always like scanning the horizon of, I wonder if that can help, bring a different perspective to something. For me, it was actually this framework, which we've just talked through, this pause, play, move framework. I wasn't pausing.
Right.
I wasn't actually building that introspection and that awareness. I was running on the model of, it's in my head, I feel tired, but that's just what business is. At the time, I was head of investment strategy for Dragon Investment Managers. And I just set up a kind of boutique distillery. And
we're going to get to that later. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. And I was doing research into resiliency and decision making.
So you had a full plate.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I built this kind of, and I loved it all. I mean, all of it, I have to say, I love learning. Learning energizes me. But I just was not pausing. I wasn't taking that step back. And not only was my work starting to suffer, but the energy I could show up with was. But because I wasn't pausing, I was just in this kind of like the societal mentality of dig deeper, push harder. Like if you stop now, it's just because you're not good enough, or you haven't got it, or all these things that we love to say to ourselves.
You start beating yourself up, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's how I got into it. Eventually, my body did what my brain couldn't, and it put me in hospital for 3 days.
Oh, wow. That's serious burnout.
I got the badge and the T-shirt. I mean, the way out was I didn't realize what I was doing on the way out. Right. It was only after I realized I started to dwell far more on my energy levels. That was the key. Now I can conceptualize that and say, actually, I was trying to downregulate. I was trying to do this pause thing. I just didn't have the terminology for it.
Okay.
But I was started paying a lot more attention, just because you have to, because you start a task and your body just doesn't go any further. It's just like, I don't understand why I haven't got the energy to push through. So you have to start showing up with the right amount of energy to a task.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, as soon as they're better, they forget about that.
Right.
It's like the rubber band effect. Oh, I'm healed.
Yeah.
I'll just go all the way back. I don't know why I didn't, but thankfully for me, it was a case of, okay, I understand that there's something missing. I think maybe because I was researching resiliency, and there was this. I think one of the really big things for me was, as a researcher of resiliency, I really shouldn't burn out. And therefore it was kind of this question in the back of my head. Well, what have I missed? What have I missed as a researcher?
Right.
And that was the pause and the play, which obviously now, kind of makes up a big part of what
the thing about that I've found, and I'm sure you found out too, the pause and the play usually have something to do with your physiology, right? You're not sleeping right. You're not eating right. You're not, getting fresh air, sunshine, movement, that to me was my wake up call. Like, I think I tell this story a lot, so I'm going to shortcut it. But in my 30s, I just realized on a trip when I was trying to walk around with friends that, I couldn't, it was like my feet just hurt like all the time. I was like, wow. I'm 30. I'm not 90. What's going on? It just made me kind of that was sort of like my burnout, right? This trip to Portland was like, geez, I got to do something, right? And that got me down the road of, sleeping's a superpower. Not eating crap, it's a superpower. And just cleaning up the diet and just focusing on, keeping your body healthy. I mean, it's not like you can't have fun, but the core of it is just, get enough sleep, eat right, move right, that kind of thing. Yeah.
And I think what you've just hit the nail on the head there is we're still talking about exactly the same thing, stress.
Yeah.
It's kind of, if you put in your body, I don't know, just processed food after processed food,
and you're
top it up with some alcohol as well.
Coffee.
Yeah. Guess what happens? It's not that necessarily we're talking about an unhealthy behavior. You're putting stress on this organism. You're putting stress, and it doesn't matter whether that stress comes from rumination, a mental process, or whether it comes from a physical action. So there's a kind of a study which highlights this. Is they put, I can't remember exactly. I'm going to make it up slightly, but they put depressed patients onto a Mediterranean diet.
Oh yeah.
And all of a sudden, kind of they had incredible numbers. I mean, the numbers were as good as, I'm going to say, kind of the leading medication for depression. And obviously a lot of people then go, there must be something magic about the Mediterranean diet.
Oh yeah.
There must be something in that olive oil.
Right. They're trying to extract the one thing. Right.
Yeah, we're trying to reduce it down again to that, the outcome.
Exactly.
You know, like we always do.
What can we scale in this?
Yeah.
Right.
But what was really happening was that there's less stress, there's less load placed on that person.
Right.
And in doing so, it suddenly allows their mental function to also downregulate. Mm-hmm. That's what seemed to be coming, you know, in reality from this study.
Right.
So absolutely, you're right. You can reduce stress by physical action, through body, through breathing, through exercise, through nutrition, or you can do it mentally. Mm-hmm. Or ideally, you do it both ways.
Both.
Because again, you know, like one of the big things, yeah, because it's only a modern idea, which we're now trying to get rid of, that our brain and body are two separate things.
Right. They're not.
Guess what? They're all in the same organism.
That's right. It's only one thing. Yes.
Yeah. And, you know, I think that view that our body is just something is a transport mechanism for our brain, you know, it's completely wrong. Right. And it's led us down some really bad roads.
Yeah.
But,
for sure.
But yeah, you're right. You can hack it from either way. And actually, if you do it from both ways, you get incredible results.
Well, you just made me think of a documentary series I just saw on Netflix. It's all about the blue zones.
Okay.
Have you ever heard any of this? So
No.
The blue zones has been around forever. I think it started in the 80s. There's this guy that made this documentary. He's been researching like why certain people get to 100 years plus.
Okay.
And it's
amazing.
And it has something to do with where they live and that lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
Right. So, yeah. So check it out, because I think the crux of the biscuit was there was this guy. I think he was from somewhere in Greece, but from somewhere overseas. He immigrated to the United States, got diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and he was like, "Well, I'm going to die probably soon. I'm going to spend the rest of my years back in my home country." So in his 70s, he moved back home, and then he lived until he was 100 plus.
Wow.
Cancer went away.
Everyone's searching for the olive he ate or something.
Exactly. Yeah. He didn't do anything, you know, he just, you know, lived life, right? He didn't consciously get a cancer treatment. He just went there to live, and that cured him, you know.
Amazing. And I mean, and what we're touching on here is our mind and body is just so incredible. Mm-hmm. You know, they are so complex and so intricately kind of put together.
Right.
By the way, in everything I'm saying, stress, I often put across as the enemy. It's not. It's just, it's how we react to it. Our stress reaction is amazing. It keeps us alive.
Yeah.
It gives us energy.
It's you know, you need to know how to work
we approach stuff.
Right.
And
exactly.
Yeah. And that's what's become out of sync in the modern world, I think.
Right.
Is just that the strategies we previously held don't work anymore.
So before we wrap up, because we're getting close to the top of the hour, we got to get you to the gym. Let's do this thing with the distillery. So how did you end up founding? What did you say? You said set up an international award-winning distillery as a side hustle. That's the best humble brag ever.
Just in the free time I didn't have. Yeah.
Right.
So actually, I'm going to bring this back. You said before we hit record, about had a fascination of beer. I did too. I nearly opened a brewery.
Oh, nice.
And then I got diagnosed with basically a gluten intolerance. And I thought, there's not much fun having a brewery if you can't drink the product.
Right.
So kind of the start of any spirit is you just want to make ethanol. That's right. That's what spirit is. I was going to say it's a safe type of alcohol. It's not.
No. It's a clear liquid.
It's just safer than the other types of alcohol.
Right.
We only have a mild allergic reaction to it, which is why we drink it and why we love it. And
I love that.
But you know, kind of beer starts, you know, spirit starts very much like a beer.
Right.
You create some alcohol, and then instead of the brewer who adds hops and is targeting a certain flavor profile and a certain ABV of alcohol, as a distiller, just like after maximum yield, and then you just kind of strip out the ethanol,
right,
and go play. So that was kind of the starting point. I nearly opened the brewery and then got diagnosed with a gluten intolerance. And then the distillery kind of just started taking shape when I started to do research. I was sat in Bruges, so in Belgium, and
man, great movie, great town, great city.
Yeah,
I almost went to Bruges, but I didn't make it.
You have to. Yeah, you should go.
I need to go. Yeah.
And it was kind of like a beautiful summer's evening, and I was sat in this restaurant. Now in Britain, we do have sunshine, but it's not that frequent. Certainly in Wales.
Right.
And it's always amazed me that kind of gin and tonic is this British idea. And yet there's probably about 5 or 6 days where it's hot enough for me personally to go like, oh my word, I really want a gin and tonic. But this evening in Bruges was one of those kind of environments. And I was like, oh my word, I'm going to have a gin and tonic. So I asked the waitress, do you have any gins? And her eyes lit up and she was like, do we have gins? We've got a gin menu. I mean, this is 2012.
Wow.
And I was like, I can name about 4.
Right.
And so she goes, we've got like 150 pairs of tonics. And I was just like, oh my word, I have nowhere to start. Just bring me your favorite. And she did. And it was, I can't even say it was on a tray. It was on a slice of oak in a balloon glass with a tonic by the side. And I was just like, oh my word. Wow. I've never seen gin respected like this. Whiskey and rum. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Kind of seen people like, kind of lovely crystal glassware and everything else that goes with it. But gin and tonic, at the time in Britain, it was like,
that's just for getting drunk.
I'll just have gin and tonic. Right. Nobody cared what the gin was. Nobody cared what the tonic was.
Right.
And if you had some citrus lying around, throw that in too.
Exactly.
And here we were kind of like sat in this restaurant and I was just like, oh my word, I've never seen it like this. And then my brain was ticking away. I'd had this disappointment of not opening a brewery. And I was like, okay, I've got like a 14-hour drive home and the kids were asleep in the back of the car. And I was just like, oh boy, when I get back to North Wales, we have to have one of the world's most amazing gins because we have some of the world's best water. And that's what's like crucial to brewing and distilling is incredible water.
Right.
And I was like, I've just never looked for it. I've just never experienced it. So I got back, I started Googling, and I found that not only did we not have gin, North Wales didn't even have a distillery. Yet we had this water that was exported all around the world.
Wow.
Then I realized that Snowdon, the biggest of our mountains, remember they're not hills, mountains.
Don't get in trouble with the Welsh.
Actually has juniper growing on the side of it. Juniper is the defining ingredient of gin. So gin has very few legal definitions.
Right.
One of them, it has to have an overriding flavor of juniper.
Wow.
And at this point, I was like, oh my word, we don't have a distillery. We have some of the world's best water, and Wales' biggest mountain grows the ingredient.
Right.
And at that point, I got very excited.
You're like, how could no one had figured this out?
Yeah, I persuaded my wife at the time that we should put all our life savings into this. It comes as no surprise to many people listening that I'm now divorced. No, it was.
You are, but not because of that.
No, yeah, I am. But she was very supportive. So this is kind of how it all came together. And then it was really an understanding of where the world was going. I think the trends kind of changing cultural products, changing what we were looking for in things. Was really, so it was called Foragers, the gin, or it still is called Foragers. And the idea was if we went back 200 years, then what gin was and why it was so synonymous with London was that where the M25, the ring road around London, that was where juniper bushes. But if you were a person of significant wealth, what you wanted to do was send your captain off on a ship to go find some weird, wonderful botanicals and bring them back.
Yeah.
Because that was extravagance.
Cool. Exactly.
Oh, it was. Yeah. Right. And if you read the back of like a bottle of traditional gin, I mean, most people will read those botanicals and have no idea what they look like in real life. I mean, you're talking like orris root, grains of paradise, licorice root, star anise. It's like that somebody just went around and gone, oh, nobody's heard of that one. We'll use it.
There you go.
So I decided to go
Gargle Master. What? Gargle Blaster.
So I decided to go the opposite way. I was like, if the old school way was find weird, wonderful, extravagant botanicals on the four corners of the world,
right,
the modern version is what grows around us.
Yeah.
What's local, what's authentic,
right,
what can I use fresh rather than freeze-dried?
Right.
And so we spent 18 months working with a botanist just going, what can we actually eat? What's edible around here? And, you know, if anyone has a kind of an image of Wales in their head, then it's this lush green land. There is
right,
so much. And we ended up with like 57 different potential botanicals.
Amazing. Wow.
Which we could use. And then it was a process of seeing how things came together. One of the botanicals which always stands out in my head, I had some real high expectations for some of them. This was bay leaf. And
bay leaf is so subtle.
Yeah. And so I was thinking, you know what? It adds nice savory flavors to cuisine. It could do wonders in this.
Yeah,
it just made everything taste like medicine.
Okay.
It was disgusting. I couldn't find a use for it.
Okay. But so you wanted to try that though. It's just lovely. Well, yeah, of course. Why not? You're playing.
So we went from 57 down to 6 botanicals.
Okay.
That was our first expression, Forager's Yellow Label. So it kind of used, we don't have any citrus in Wales, which is a challenge because citrus adds a lovely note to gin.
Okay.
But what we did use instead is something called sea buckthorn, which is an absolutely mental botanical, which tastes almost like fermented marmalade.
Wow. That's an interesting flavor profile right there.
Yeah. And it grows around the coastline.
Okay.
So it can actually even get salt spray too. So we got juniper and sea buckthorn. And then we added in kind of some nice kind of sweet notes, which come from apple and elderberry.
Okay.
Because they line the hedgerows around here. And then mountain flowers, we used chamomile and heather.
Oh, wow.
So kind of, you know, again,
like
so much of it around here.
Feel.
Yeah. So that was Yellow Label. And then we distilled a second one called Black Label, Forager's Black Label, which I always used to describe as Yellow Label's evil twin brother. Essentially, we upped the alcohol percentage.
Right.
And I wanted something really bold. But I didn't want to do what everyone else was doing. There's a running theme in my life story. If somebody else is doing it, I want to do the opposite.
You got to zag if everybody's zigging. Sure.
Yeah. And so everyone else was making these big bold gins by just throwing as many botanicals in the pot. So I don't know if you've come across Monkey 47 big gin.
Wow. No.
Okay. 40, I believe it's 47 botanicks.
That's crazy.
But it's a story I tell everybody. I apologize to them if it's not true. But
fact check us. It's okay.
But there was this move just to throw as many in as possible because that was seen as cool.
Right. So you go the other way, right?
Yeah, because if you come back to cooking, like if I make a stew with like 50 different ingredients,
most of those are getting lost, right?
Yeah, I can forget a couple and I can burn one or two and you're never going to know.
Right.
But if you go to the other end, like if you go to like a fine dining restaurant, they're pairing together 2 or 3 ingredients and it just somehow you just go, oh my word.
Yeah.
There's like this simple elegance.
Yeah.
And so I wanted a big bold flavor, but I wanted simple elegance.
Okay.
So Forager's Black Label actually became at the time, I think there was only 3 gins in the world which had done this. We were using 2 botanicals and it's a real technical gin, but it was big flavor. And it just made the most amazing line of Negronis, martinis, you know, kind of anything where you want that elegance when you want other flavors to like play with it.
Yeah. The first time I ran into that concept was I had a friend in the Air Force. She was ethnic Italian, grew up in an Italian family. Amazing. So she cooked me like the Italians have this Christmas holiday meal that has to have so many different kinds of seafood. So I'm not going to, I only did it once, right? But I experienced the beauty of Italian cuisine, which is let the basics speak, right? those are amazing tomatoes. That is amazing basil, right? This garlic came out of my garden, right? And all of these basics just come through. And that's all you need. You don't need to be mucking about, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's exactly what became the signature of foragers, was just, if we go to the effort of finding stuff which grows around us,
the best ingredient that's local,
then just play to it. Just use the attributes that it already has.
As we wrap up, I'm gonna give you one more, and then we'll close out so you can go to the gym. I already stole 6 minutes. I'm sorry. So
that's all right, don't worry.
I made while I was brewing beer, I was doing malt extract brewing.
Okay.
So this is where you buy like pre-cooked extracts that are basically unhopped blank, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So I got this recipe from a buddy who was an award-winning craft brewer. He had been in competitions. He knew what he was doing, right?
Amazing.
He's like, and he's got this big access database of recipes. He's like, he comes over to my house and he says, "You're ready." And he shows me this recipe. So I don't want to get too deep into the weeds, but it was an Irish cream stout, right? So, and it had like this amazing amount of bittering hops, right? So we had this, because there was so much sugar in there, right? It was just like a ton of, chocolate and really super dark stouty, malt. And, he was like, you can throw as much bittering hop at this as you want. And it doesn't matter because you've got this big wall of sugar that you're slamming against.
You're fighting against.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's not going to be bitter. It doesn't matter how much hops you use. So let's experiment. Let's play. So I think we went and spent way too much money on how much bittering hops we went in there. He's like, any more than 2, you're wasting. So we did 2 ounces of hops, right?
Okay.
For bittering in the boil. And then I lost count of how many flavoring hops we went in, right? But we just lined up these bags. That was the best beer I ever made or drank.
Amazing.
I had
cool.
because it was just like the closest. It was better. Have you ever had a really good stout? Say like it's not technically a stout, but one of my favorite dark beers is a Stone Arrogant Bastard.
No.
Oh my God.
But I feel just on the name I need to try.
Well, you can't because you're lactose intolerant, but I'm sorry. But anyway, what I would say is if I ever wanted to brew beer again, I want to do that one again.
Yeah. And there's something amazing, isn't there, about creating something.
Yeah.
And again,
because you don't know how it's going to work out.
Yeah, and circling all the way back.
Like that thing that you made and you didn't like it. Yeah. Bailey.
But it's about playing.
Exactly.
And when you're playful, you can be experimental.
Exactly.
I think that's kind of the summary of our conversation.
I made many, many batches of beer that ended up doing nothing but boiling sausage. And that's an excellent use of beer.
Yeah. Super.
It always has a use. All right, Chris Marshall, this has been a blast. Let's tell people how they can get in touch with Chris. So you're chrismarshall.uk. So talk a little bit.
Chris.
Yep.
Yeah. chrismarshall.uk is kind of my personal site.
Okay.
It's got links to everything else in there.
Excellent.
So if people are interested in like the PPM method that we've talked about,
right, PPM,
they can get a link from there or just go straight to ppmmethod.com.
Perfect.
I'm on LinkedIn. Yeah, just reach out to me wherever I am. I'm friendly. I chat.
And playful. All right, Chris.
And playful. Yeah.
This has been a blast.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me.
You have a good one and have a good workout.
Thank you.
Thanks for taking the time to ride along with us on another episode of Vroom Vroom Veer. For podcast info and show notes, be sure to head over to vvveer.com. That's VVER.com. Man, that's fun to say. And we'll catch up with you next time here on Vroom Vroom Veer.